Hey everyone, I'm Thanos Davelis, and welcome back to The Greek Current, a podcast by the Hellenic American Leadership Council and Kathimerini, where we highlight the top stories of the day every afternoon with analysis from guest experts, policymakers, journalists, and HELC staff. Last month, the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers agreed to initiate the infringement process against Turkey in December unless it complies with the European Court of Human Rights ruling and releases political prisoner Osman Kavala. Kavala has been unjustly jailed for almost 4 years. The Council of Europe's warning also urged Ankara to comply with another recent European Court of Human Rights ruling to immediately free Kurdish opposition leader Selahattin Demirtas, the leader of the People's Democratic Party, or the HDP, who has been imprisoned since 2016. Merve Tahiroglu joins the Greek Current to discuss this latest warning from the Council of Europe and explore what's at stake should Turkey fail to comply with the European Court of Human Rights. Merve Tahiroglu is the Turkey coordinator at PAMED, the Project on Middle East Democracy. Merve, welcome back.
Hi, Thanos.
So we've covered the Kavala and Demirtas stories in depth on other podcast episodes, but before we get into this latest development at the Council of Europe, can you give our listeners a brief backgrounder on these two public figures and why the Turkish government is insisting on keeping them behind bars?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what makes these two men particularly important, the cases against them, because, of course, in Turkey, there are 100,000 people who are in jail right now, more than 50,000 people who are accused of really absurd charges in many cases related to terrorism. And tens of thousands of political prisoners exist in Turkey right now. So it's really not just these two men. But what makes Kavala and Demirtas cases particularly important is that both of them are pretty prominent figures. Selahattin Demirtas is a very charismatic, well-known, highly popular Kurdish political leader of the HDP, former co-chair of the HDP. He ran for presidential elections twice in 2014 and 2018. So he's a very well-known figure. And he really grew his party's voter base significantly back in 2015 when he helped the HDP become the first predominantly Kurdish party to pass the 10% nationwide election threshold and make it to the parliament. Previously, Kurdish parties weren't able to do that. So he was a very successful politician and a very successful opposition politician, of course, and a huge opposition leader against Erdogan. So he's a political detainee. In his case, I think because he is an opposition leader, because he was such a successful opposition leader, and because of the fact that he's a Kurdish political leader, makes his case really important. I guess Osman Kavala is kind of like a civil society counterpart to Selahattin Demirtas. He's an apolitical figure, but he's a liberal. He's a philanthropist and a well-known civil society leader who has been involved in many projects, but also headed a bunch of cultural organizations. One of the things he's known for is arguing for or trying to promote social reconciliation between Turkey's ethnic minorities and the Turks, bringing justice and equal rights for Turkey's ethnic and religious minorities, and overall promoting pluralism and, all through peaceful ways, through the arts and cultural activities and so forth. And this person is another high-profile political prisoner who has been accused of, much like Selahattin Demirtas, of being involved in terrorism. And in addition to that, he's actually also being accused of masterminding mass protests in Turkey in 2013 and trying to bring down the government by concocting these protests. And also, in addition to that, of supporting a coup attempt and espionage. Selahattin Demirtas is also facing multiple charges related to terrorism. Both of them have taken their cases to the European Court of Human Rights, which has ruled on behalf of both of the men, saying that they were unjustly imprisoned and that there isn't enough evidence suggesting that they have committed any of the crimes that have been alleged against them. And the court has ordered Turkey to release both of those men. And that is the most important, thing that the two men right now share, that they have this European Court of Human Rights verdict against them, and yet they still remain behind bars in Turkey.
That brings me to my next question, Merve, related to this warning from the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. What exactly is the Council of Europe calling for?
So this is called an infringement process. And what that basically means, what Turkey is being accused of infringing here, is, of course, the European Court of Human Rights, which is the ECHR. I'm just going to call it the court. The ECHR is basically like the judicial arm of the Council of Europe. So Turkey and all of the members of the Council of Europe have signed the European Convention on Human Rights and passed laws within their own countries, binding their own court systems to the European Court of Human Rights, which is tasked with enforcing the Convention of Human Rights. So what that means is that to be a member of the Council of Europe, you have to uphold certain human rights values, which are enshrined in the Convention. And if you do not uphold those values and if you don't guarantee those rights, then you will have to pay a price at the European Court of Human Rights, and you have to consider the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights higher than the highest court of your own domestic court. So, for example, your own constitutional court even. So Turkey, by law, like all members of the Council of Europe and signatories to the European Convention of Human Rights, is bound by law to follow the European Court of Human Rights rulings. Now, it hasn't been following those rulings for the release of Selahattin Demirtas and Osman Kavala. In particular, the Kavala case has been an egregious example. The European court, that is, has made multiple calls on Turkey to release this man, also Selahattin Demirtas, but that is relatively more recently it was finalized, that decision. And for Kavala, it's been almost 2 years now that Turkey has been defying this court order. So according to the own rules of the Council of Europe, there has to be some pushback against members who so blatantly defy the court's rulings. So Turkey is now facing this infringement process. Basically, the Council has given Turkey until November 30, until the next time it will have a ministerial meeting. If Turkey doesn't abide by this European Court of Human Rights ruling and release Kavala by then it is going to officially start an infringement process, which means that Turkey down the line in the next few months could be facing a host of sanctions by the Council of Europe, including losing its voting rights or even getting its membership suspended.
Are there any precedents, Merve, that we can look at that could provide us with an example of how this process could play out?
Well, yes, I mean, it would be very embarrassing for Turkey if they officially start this process, although I should note that many people would consider this warning already as a first step by the Council of Europe to start the process. The first step of starting the infringement process would be for the Council of Europe to ask the European Court of Human Rights to officially tell it whether or not Turkey has been following its rulings, which it hasn't been, but that would be what would initiate the process. So if the Council of Europe initiates this process, Turkey will be the second country to ever face this. Only Azerbaijan has really faced this before, back in 2017-18, also for defying European Court of Human Rights rulings. And what happened in that case is that Azerbaijan, ultimately the government complied with the ECHR ruling, and it ended up avoiding the worst sanctions. Turkey itself, about a decade ago, has faced the threat of an infringement process itself, but the process was never initiated. It again ended up complying with the European Court of Human Rights. So this infringement process is not something that the Council of Europe applies all the time. It has really happened exceptionally in the past. So if it happens against Turkey, it would be really embarrassing because Turkey would be the second country ever really to face it.
Merve, Turkey, as a member of the Council of Europe and a signatory of the European Convention of Human Rights, is bound, as you mentioned, by its own laws to implement the ECHR's verdicts. Despite this, it remains among the ECHR's top offenders, as you pointed out in your piece. Can you walk us through what you've called Turkey's fraught relationship with the Council of Europe and the ECHR?
Well, yes, of course. Turkey has a fraught relationship with the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe because of its human rights record and how much its human rights record at home has deteriorated over the past few years. So this defiance that we're seeing from Turkey, not implementing the European Court of Human Rights decisions, keeping Selahattin Demirtas and Osman Kavala and many, many other people in jail unjustly and for no good reason, but out of political motivations. This has been a trend in Turkey in the past few years. So it's really not a coincidence or not even a surprise that Turkey has been defying the European Court of Human Rights rulings. There is a reason why Turkey is one of the members of the Council of Europe that faces the highest number of cases at the European Court. This means that more people from Turkey have applied to the European Court of Human Rights saying that Turkey has violated their basic freedoms. I mean, that speaks volumes about a country. And this is why its relationship has frayed with many of its neighbors, many of the multilateral institutions that it's a part of, including the OSCE. So it's not just the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights, but those are among the most important ones. But really, I think the deterioration of human rights in Turkey, the rule of law, democracy, and democratic governance, all of these things have impacted Turkey's foreign policy as well, and behavior abroad more generally. I think Turkey used to be a much more responsible member of the international community, not a perfectly responsible member, but a much more responsible member. And, it used to follow its obligations to agreements that it's part of, particularly those related to democracy and human rights. And in the past few years, we're seeing an open defiance, a trend completely against that. And I think this trend, unfortunately, looks like it's going to continue unless this Council of Europe warning can really be heard in Ankara by policymakers. And if Osman Kavala is released before this next Council of Europe meeting in November, I think hopefully that could be a positive sign that things in Turkey might change. But this has been a long-term trend now that we've seen over the last decade, so I'm not that hopeful.
Merve, given this record that you just laid out for us and the trends that you discussed on human rights in Turkey, do you think that the infringement process will be enough to pressure the Erdogan regime to let Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas go free?
Rationally speaking, it should be, because again, I mean, if Turkey ends up facing this infringement process, I think it would be really embarrassing, terrible for its international reputation, which is already pretty bad, again, because of the deteriorating human rights record, or rather, at this point, a human rights crisis that it's facing. And beyond that, if Turkey does end up losing its voting rights, for example, at the Council of Europe, it would significantly fray its relationship with this institution. And the Council of Europe is one of the most important institutions linking Turkey to Europe. And as we know, Europe is very important for Turkey, for Turkey's economy, for its, diplomatic relations. And so I think overall, facing an infringement process should definitely be something that policymakers in Turkey should be something that they are trying to avoid. But I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Particularly the release of Selahattin Demirtas, I think, poses too much of a political threat to President Erdogan. That's why this man has been in jail. He was so successful in his opposition to Erdogan back in 2015 that this is one way that I think Erdogan has been able to put a check on him and to keep the HDP from growing its popularity. So I think it's really hard politically for Erdogan to let a figure like Selahattin Demirtas go. Now, they could let Osman Kavala go because I think the threat that, Osman Kavala poses to Erdogan's rule is really minuscule. So in that sense, going back to your original question, you asked, why is Turkey insist on keeping these men in jail? With Selahattin Demirtas, there's a clear political calculus there. But with Osman Kavala, it's actually quite a baffling case as to why the Turkish government finds him threatening. He does promote liberal values of pluralism and peace and tolerance, values that go directly against, the official doctrine of Erdogan's regime. But other than that, there's no real direct threat that Osman Kavala, as a civil society leader, poses to Erdogan. So I think there is a chance that Turkey might release him. And of course, this is what the Council of Europe's infringement process threats is based on. It's not based on Demirtas. It's based on Osman Kavala's release. So I think there's a way Turkey might avoid this outcome come November. But that said, ultimately, Turkey is going to keep facing this threat of infringement if it fails to comply with the European Court of Human Rights in other cases. And those cases include Selahattin Demirtas. So ultimately, unless Turkey gets its human rights back on track, I think this threat facing its relationship with the Council of Europe is never going to go away.
Selahattin Demirtas' case and broader concerns that Turkey is moving to shut down the HDP was also the central focus of a recent letter sent by 10 U.S. senators to President Biden. Can you expand on the significance of this move by these influential U.S. senators?
I think normally on its own, a letter like this from 10 senators wouldn't be too groundbreaking. But I do see this as part of a growing trend in Washington This is just, I think, the latest in a slew of recent incidents, particularly during certain hearings, whether it's with Undersecretary Victoria Nuland's hearing on U.S. policy on Turkey, or recently the nominee for U.S. ambassador for Turkey had his confirmation hearing where we had senators ask questions and weigh in on U.S. policy on Turkey and what's going on in Turkey. So we've had recently a bunch of platforms where we've had congressional representatives voice their opinions on U.S. policy on Turkey. And I think increasingly there's been references to this case in Turkey to close down the HDP and the overall repression that this predominantly Kurdish party has been facing. What this shows us, I think, is that Congress cares more and more about what the Turkish government's crackdown against the HDP, which has been ongoing really since 2015. And Congress has had some pushback against this. We have heard occasionally senators and representatives speak out against this, but these calls have greatly increased since Turkey brought forth this case threatening to actually ban the party. So in addition to all of the crackdowns that the party has faced, now they're threatening to ban it. And I think Congress cares about this issue more and more. And this comes also as part of another trend where Congress seems more and more interested in Turkey's domestic situation more generally, particularly with regards to human rights and democracy. So it used to care, I think, much more about Turkey's foreign policy. When we had Congress weigh in on Turkey-related matters, it used to be around Turkey's relationship with Russia or in the region and security concerns that the U.S. continues to have with Turkey. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more attention on Turkey's human rights record. And I think given how important that this case is, this potential of banning such a significant political actor, especially ahead of elections that are in less than 2 years in Turkey, shows to me that Washington is going to pay more and more attention to what happens with this case in particular, with the plight of the Kurds in Turkey, with the minorities, and with political pluralism moving forward.
This effort from Congress came days after an interview in which Erdogan said that President Biden never raised any concerns about human rights abuse issues to him during their personal conversations. How concerning is this, particularly as the Biden administration has made it a point to emphasize that human rights worldwide are at the heart of its foreign policy?
Yeah, so we talked about the growing interest in Congress with human rights. The Biden administration, of course, when it came and took office in January, they made a promise to make human rights and democracy center of their foreign policy. This gave a lot of hope to many watchers in Turkey and politicos watching the U.S.-Turkish relationship, thinking, especially after 4 years of the Trump administration, which had very friendly relations with Erdogan and very, very rarely brought up human rights issues, and only even then in calculated cases. It gave a lot of hope to Turkish people that the Biden administration might be tough on Erdogan when it comes to his human rights abuses and violations domestically. And really, the Biden administration did start off doing that. There were a lot of, in succession, statements coming out of the State Department criticizing important developments related to human rights issues in Turkey, criticizing the Turkish government's violations. But that seems to have stopped really since May. And Erdogan and Biden had a phone call in April, and then they had a first in-person meeting in June. And what Erdogan recently said, that in these interactions that he's had with President Biden, that Biden has never mentioned any of these human rights issues, I think it came as a huge disappointment to a lot of those people who were hopeful that the Biden administration might pursue a different U.S. policy when it comes to Turkey. It seems that while the State Department has continued to send this message to Turkey that the United States really cares about human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and we've seen this in many statements, and we shouldn't discount those statements and the impact that those have, but it seems like at the highest levels, at the presidential level, for example, this hasn't been a priority for U.S. policy. And I think that's upsetting. And I think perhaps what these moves that we're seeing from Congress, such as this letter by these 10 senators to President Biden, are in some ways a pushback against that, as well as being a pushback against Erdogan's behavior within Turkey.
Merve, thanks for joining us again on The Greek Current. Always great having you with us.
Great to be with you.
In other news, Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis said on Tuesday that the European Union needs to speed up the debate on European strategic autonomy and to make clear commitments on the accession prospects of Western Balkan countries. Mitsotakis is in Slovenia to attend the informal European Council meeting and the EU Western Balkan Summit, where EU leaders are set to examine the accession bids of North Macedonia and fellow candidate country Albania. Questions remain over the future of the two EU hopefuls and what impact any new rejection might have. Commenting on the Western Balkans, Mitsotakis said time was running out, adding that if the European Union is absent from this region, there is no doubt that others will rush to fill the void. Finally, Cyprus's Foreign Minister Nikos Christodoulidis discussed Turkey's latest provocations in Cyprus's exclusive economic zone with EU High Representative Josep Borrell on Tuesday. On Monday, Turkey announced it sent away the nautical GEO, a research vessel flying the Maltese flag that was carrying out surveys in Cyprus's exclusive economic zone. Christodoulidis said the nautical GEO was carrying out a survey on behalf of an Italian company and was harassed by two Turkish Navy frigates at 21 nautical miles off the coast of Cyprus. He also said that these surveys were funded by the European Union. He added that Turkey has now illegally reserved the area in which the vessel was carrying out surveys for military exercises, right next to where Cyprus, Greece, France, and Italy are holding a joint exercise. That wraps up today's episode of The Greek Current. Thanks for tuning in.